The snow was falling in soft, reluctant flakes that morning over JFK International Airport. It wasn't the kind of snow that silenced the world, just enough to blur the glass walls to turn people into moving shadows between light and frost. Inside, the world kept spinning, rolling suitcases, boarding calls, laughter that didn't last long enough. Amara Blake moved through the terminal as if she belonged to none of it. Her stride was sure, her coat perfectly pressed her heels, whispering across marble floors that reflected too much of her face. At 39, she was the kind of woman people turned to watch, not because of beauty, though she had plenty of that, but because of presence. She was the CEO of BILLIONAIRE, a name that soared across continents. The first black woman to head a global airline. Her jet waited on the private runway, fueled and ready to take her to Zurich. Another summit, another speech, another round of polite applause. Her assistant had already gone ahead. There were only a few steps left between her and the elevator that led to her private terminal. And then she stopped. At first, she thought her mind was playing one of its cruel tricks again, those flashes of memory she had learned to bury. But no, this wasn't memory. This was now. Through the frosted glass that divided the commercial gates from the private section, a man bent down to tie a child's shoelace. His coat was worn a size too big. His hair had thinned in places she remembered running her fingers through. But that jawline, strong, honest, unpretending, she would have known it anywhere. Jake Miller, her ex-husband, the man whose laughter once lived in every room of their home, the man she had left behind on a morning that still haunted her like a song with no ending. Beside him stood two girls, maybe 8, maybe 9 now. One had a paperback, open lips, moving silently as she read. The other was pointing at a vending machine, laughing about something only children could find funny. Amara's breath caught her chest, locked, and suddenly she wasn't a billionaire, wasn't a CEO, wasn't anyone at all. Because those eyes, those were her daughters, Lily and June. She hadn't seen them since the hospital, since they were only 2 days old, and her own mind had become a storm she couldn't control. She'd promised herself that leaving them was mercy. She'd told herself that a broken mother was worse than no mother at all. Now, 6 years later, they stood 10 yards away, alive, in the space she'd spent half a lifetime pretending she didn't ache for. The intercom buzzed overhead. Flight 427 to Zurich, now boarding at gate 11. But Amara didn't move. She couldn't. Her legs were trembling, and she hadn't trembled in years. Her hand tightened around her leather bag, as if the world might tilt. Jake stood, straightened his jacket, turned and saw her. For a heartbeat, the whole airport fell away. They looked at each other through the glass, two ghosts colliding across time. His expression didn't change. No shock, no smile, just a calm, bone-deep stillness. And that was worse than any anger she could have imagined. Then something unexpected. A woman stepped up beside him, light-skinned hair, in a messy bun, laughing softly as she handed Lily a cup of hot chocolate. Her hand brushed Jake's arm. Familiar. Easy. Amara felt her chest cave in. He'd moved on. Of course he had. Her vision blurred, not with tears, but something heavier, the weight of knowing you'd been replaced, that life had continued without you, and that maybe it was better that way. A voice echoed over the loudspeaker again. Final call for Flight 427. She could have gone. She should have gone. But instead she turned away from the gate and walked anywhere but forward. Her heels clattered against the tile, too loud, too human. She found herself in a quiet corner, near an unused gate, where the snow outside looked like static against a gray sky. Her hands were shaking as she took out her phone. She hadn't looked at that contact in years, but the name was still there. Jake Miller. The number hadn't been deleted through all the new phones, new passwords, new identities she'd built. It had survived her reinvention, her ambition, her loneliness. She typed, "It's me," then deleted it. Typed again. "I saw you today." Paused. Deleted that, too. What was she supposed to say? "Hi, remember me? I left you with 2 newborns and a lifetime of questions." No. There were no words for this kind of sin, only silence and the unbearable hum of regret. Her assistant's message popped up on the screen. "Jet's ready. Zurich expects you by 6 p.m. local time." Amara didn't answer. She turned the phone face down on her lap and stared at her reflection in the window. Her reflection stared back, immaculate makeup, precision-cut hair, flawless composure. A woman who could out-negotiate any man in a boardroom. But underneath, she saw it, the hollow behind the eyes, the part that never thawed. She pressed her hand to the cold glass. Beyond the fog, she could just make out Jake's silhouette again, lifting June into his arms, the other woman standing close beside them. The 3 of them looked complete. Her throat closed. A flight attendant passed by, dragging a silver suitcase. "Ma'am, you look pale. Are you all right?" Amara forced a smile. "I'm fine." She wasn't. When she finally left the terminal an hour later, her car idled at the curb, engine humming softly like a pulse. The driver opened the door, but she didn't climb in right away. She looked back at the glass walls, the place where she had seen everything she'd lost, in a single breath. The snow was heavier now. The lights blurred into halos, and for a moment she wished she could rewind time. Not to change her choices, but to understand them. Inside her chest, something old and frozen shifted. Just slightly. That night in her Manhattan penthouse overlooking the city, she sat by the window with a glass of water she never drank. The skyline glittered like broken promises. On her desk sat a small blue box, one she hadn't touched in 6 years. Inside were 2 letters written in her own hand, yellowed at the edges. For Lily. For June. She had written them when the girls were only months old, on nights when guilt had almost killed her. Letters she'd meant to send for their 5th birthdays to tell them their mother hadn't stopped loving them. She just didn't know how to love right. She opened one envelope. The ink had faded, but the words still cut clean. "If someday you look for me, know that I didn't vanish because I forgot you. I vanished because I forgot myself." A tear finally fell, one single line, tracing her cheek. It startled her. She hadn't cried since the day she walked out of that hospital. The city outside kept glowing, oblivious, endless. Amara folded the letter and held it to her chest. Somewhere out there, her daughters were alive, laughing, living a story that didn't include her. And maybe, just maybe, there was still time to write herself back into it. She picked up her phone again. Her thumb hovered over Jake's name. For 6 years, she'd built an empire on silence. Maybe it was time to break it. She didn't send a message that night. But she didn't delete his number either. Outside, the snow had stopped falling. Inside, for the first time in years, something inside her began to melt. The heart doesn't age. It remembers. It forgives slower, but deeper. Sometimes love isn't about who you hold. It's about who you find the courage to face again. The next morning arrived without invitation. The sun slipped over the skyline like it was afraid to disturb her. Amara hadn't slept. The letters still lay open on the desk beside her, untouched tea, and New York, with all its glitter and grind, felt smaller somehow, like a city of ghosts, whispering through glass. For 6 years, she had told herself that what she did was survival. That walking away from Jake, from 2 newborn daughters, had been the only way to save them from the darkness inside her. The doctors had called it postpartum psychosis. She remembered those days in fragments, the trembling hands, the whispers that weren't real, the moment she'd stood by the window terrified of herself. But time, for all its cruelty, has a way of peeling back the lies we tell ourselves. It wasn't survival anymore. It was avoidance. Her assistant Clara arrived promptly at 9, balancing 2 coffees and a folder thick with flight schedules. "You missed Zurich," Clara said softly, as if announcing a death. "I know." Amara's voice was calm, too calm. "We'll reschedule the board." Clara continued placing the folder on the table. "They'll understand. You've earned that much." Amara smiled faintly. "They always understand, don't they? As long as I keep the planes flying." Clara hesitated. "You look different today." "Do I?" "Yes, softer." Amara laughed under her breath, a low, broken sound. "Maybe I'm just tired of being made of steel." When Clara left, the silence came back heavier now. Amara stared at the skyline for a long moment before she reached for her phone again. The name, Jake Miller, blinked back like a dare. She didn't call. Not yet. But she called someone else. At precisely 10:30 a.m., Cameron Hale walked into her office. A woman in her 40s, polished, discreet, once FBI, now Amara's private intelligence consultant. If anyone could find the truth hidden behind time, it was Cameron. "Long time no call," Cameron said, setting her leather bag down. "You usually reach out when there's a merger, not a man." Amara ignored the jab. "I need to know where he is." "Jake Miller." Cameron studied her for a beat. "That name hasn't come up in years." "You sure about this?" "No," Amara admitted. "But do it anyway." Cameron nodded, efficient as ever. "Give me 24 hours. It took less than 12. By evening, Cameron returned with a gray folder bound in thin elastic. She didn't say a word until she placed it in Amara's hands. "He's in Denver," she said. "Teaches part-time at a public arts charter school. Lives near City Park, small rental house. No records of remarriage." Amara flipped open the folder. The first photograph nearly stopped her breath. Jake in a threadbare jacket walking between 2 girls through falling snow. June's mittened hand in his left, Lily's in his right. Their cheeks flushed with laughter. The next image was quieter. Jake sitting at an upright piano in what looked like a school music room. His smile was faint, but real. His eyes, those same steady blue eyes, focused on a student's hands over the keys. And then, on page 3, the words that hollowed her out. "Medical diagnosis, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS. Early onset. 8 months. Amara's hand trembled. Cameron spoke gently. "It's progressing slowly for now. But you know what that means long term." "I know." "He's still teaching. Still caring for the twins alone. A sister helps, sometimes a nurse part-time." Amara frowned. "A sister?" "Yes. Harper Miller. She's the one you saw at the airport." The breath Amara didn't realize she was holding slipped out in a shudder. The woman she thought was Jake's new love wasn't. She was family. Something inside her unclenched, and then just as quickly broke open again. Cameron pulled one last page from the folder, a scan of handwritten lyrics. The ink faded and crooked. "I found this in a shared school drive," Cameron said. "He uploads music for his students. This one wasn't public." Amara read the words aloud under her breath. "I tried to build a song with what you left me, but the melody breaks where your name should be." Her throat tightened. She traced the half-finished note at the bottom, the line that ended mid-air, like he'd stopped mid-thought. "He never finished it," Cameron said softly. "Maybe he didn't know how. Neither did she." When Cameron left, Amara sat alone for a long time, the file open in front of her like a confession. Outside, the city's lights flickered through the fog, each one a pulse of something still alive, still possible. For years, she had believed she'd buried her love, beneath ambition, beneath guilt. But love like that doesn't die. It just hides, waiting for you to be brave enough to find it again. Amara stood, walked to the safe behind her desk, and unlocked it. Inside lay a small linen-wrapped box, one she hadn't opened since she'd written those unsent letters. She added the photograph of Jake and the twins on top, closed it gently, and whispered, "I'm sorry." But apology wasn't enough anymore. She picked up her phone and finally opened his number. The same message she'd typed at the airport was still there. "It's me." This time she didn't overthink it. She didn't delete it. She just pressed send. Hours later, in a small house in Denver, Jake Miller's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. He was washing dishes, the radio humming low, his daughters asleep upstairs. He dried his hands, glanced at the screen, and froze. 2 words. No punctuation, no name needed. "It's me." He closed his eyes, let out a breath that sounded almost like a prayer, and set the phone face down beside the sink. He didn't reply. Not yet. He walked into the living room, where a half-written piece of music still rested on the piano stand. The same song. The one he'd never been able to finish. He touched a single key, let it ring, and whispered to the empty room. She found the melody. In New York, Amara watched her phone for hours, waiting for a reply that didn't come. But for the first time in years, the waiting didn't feel like punishment. It felt like hope, wearing thin shoes, tired, but walking toward something. She stepped onto her balcony. The city below shimmered with the restless pulse of late winter. A gust of cold brushed her face, and she let it. The snow had melted overnight. The streets were wet and alive again. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of tomorrow. She turned her face to the wind and whispered a promise only the night could hear. "I'm coming home." It was nearly dawn when Amara decided. Not with words, not with a plan, just with stillness. The kind that comes after years of running. Outside her penthouse, New York, was slowly waking, lights flickering in apartment windows like small, stubborn hopes. The streets below glistened with the memory of snow. Amara stood by the glass, her reflection pale against the dark sky, and thought of Denver, of a man whose hands once steadied hers, of 2 girls she'd never watched grow. By 8 o'clock, her assistant Clara was knocking on the door. "Your Zurich team has been calling since 6, she said, holding out the phone. "Tell them I won't make it," Amara replied, buttoning her coat. "Should I reschedule?" "No." Amara looked up, her voice softer but firmer. "Tell them I'm taking time off. Indefinite." Clara froze. "You don't take time off. I do now." The plane to Denver was half empty. No champagne, no assistants, no tailored silence. Just Amara, a window seat, and a sky so wide it felt like a confession. She spent most of the flight staring at the clouds, remembering. Not the arguments, those were easy. What she remembered were smaller things. Jake humming off key while fixing a leaky faucet, his hands always warm. The way he'd rub his thumb over her wrist whenever she was anxious, as if he could quiet the noise in her mind, just by touch. She had left that man with nothing but a note. 6 words, "Don't follow me. I'm not safe." When the plane landed, Denver greeted her with a low gray sky and air so crisp it hurt to breathe. Her driver, a woman in her 50s named Paulina, held a small sign that read, "Miss B Business," or "Personal." Paulina asked as she loaded the luggage. Amara hesitated. "I'm not sure yet." The ride from the airport to the city was quiet. Snow along the roadside was melting into pale slush. Children in puffy jackets dragged sleds across patches of grass that didn't quite remember spring yet. Paulina glanced in the rearview mirror. "You look nervous, honey." Amara smiled faintly. "Do I?" "Yeah." Like somebody about to tell the truth for the first time. Amara's laugh was soft, a sound that almost surprised her. Maybe that's exactly it. They reached Liberty Park, a stretch of land, dusted with snow and morning mist. Across the street stood a brick building with a modest sign, Denver Neurology and Rehabilitation Clinic. Paulina parked discreetly behind a line of SUVs. "You sure you don't want me to wait inside? I'll be fine." Amara sat in the car, the heater humming quietly, her breath fogging the glass. Her hands were cold, despite the warmth. She watched the entrance of the clinic the way a diver watches the surface before plunging, knowing she'd either rise or drown. And then, there they were. Jake came out first, walking carefully down the ramp. He moved slower than she remembered, a slight hesitation in his step, his gloved hand resting lightly on the railing. His hat sat low over his forehead. Behind him, Lily and June followed, one holding his hand, the other balancing a paper cup of cocoa, with both hands like it was something sacred. Amara's breath hitched. She hadn't expected the ache to be physical. They paused at the sidewalk. Jake looked both ways, and then, by some pull she didn't understand, he turned his head toward her. Through 2 panes of glass and 6 years of silence, their eyes met. He didn't startle, didn't smile. His expression was steady, almost tender, in its exhaustion. But in that quiet recognition, something passed between them, a sentence neither could finish. He said nothing, but his gaze spoke. "So you finally came back." Amara didn't realize her hand had reached for the door handle until she heard it click. The cold bit her skin as she stepped out. "Jake." Her voice came out smaller than she intended, almost a whisper lost in the wind. He stopped. Lily and June turned, confusion flickering in their faces. Jake lifted a hand as if to hold the moment in place. "You don't get to do this," he said quietly, not angry, just certain. "I'm not here to cause a scene," she said. I just wanted to see you, to see them." Jake shook his head. "They didn't need you to see them, Amara. They needed you to stay." The words hit like frostbite, slow, sharp, and merciless. Lily tugged his sleeve. "Dad, can we go?" He turned to her, his tone gentler. "Yes, sweetheart. Let's go." The 3 of them started toward the corner, the twins' hands wrapped around his. Amara stood frozen in the parking lot, her heart pounding against the cold air. Just before they entered the clinic, Lily glanced back. No anger, no tears, just a look, clear, steady, almost adult. A look that said, "I remember." Then she turned away, and they were gone. The car ride back to the hotel felt endless. The heater's hum was the only sound. Outside, Denver drifted past in gray silence, snow traffic lights, a city living quietly in its own rhythm. Paulina glanced back once. "Rough day." Amara nodded. "The roughest." "You did it, though," Paulina said. "You showed up." Amara looked out at the falling snow, her reflection ghosted in the glass. "Showing up doesn't mean you belong." "Maybe not," Paulina replied softly. "But it's where belonging begins." That night, Amara sat on the edge of her hotel bed, the hum of the heater filling the room. She hadn't cried at the clinic, not even when Jake turned away, but now the stillness broke her open. She cried quietly without sound, like someone learning how to feel again. In the space between sobs, she heard echoes: June's laugh, Lily's steady voice, Jake's calm patience, fragments of a life she'd forfeited. When the tears slowed, she opened her phone. Jake's message thread was still blank. No reply. She typed a new one, I'm still in Denver. Then she deleted it. She wasn't ready to ask for forgiveness. Not yet. Forgiveness had to be earned by presence, not words. Outside, snow fell again, fine and quiet, like a secret returning home. Amara turned off the lights and lay down, her hand resting over her chest where it hurt the most. Tomorrow she decided she would go back to the park. Not to chase, not to beg, just to watch, just to remember. And maybe for the first time to understand what it meant not to run. The morning came softly with the kind of pale light that makes everything look a little forgiving. Amara woke early, the city still half asleep beyond her hotel window. She hadn't dreamed, not in the way she used to. No frantic flashes, no crying babies, no hospital rooms. Just stillness. Downstairs, the lobby smelled of coffee and clean linen. The same driver Paulina waited by the door, hat tilted against the cold. Same place she asked. Amara hesitated, then nodded. Same place. The drive to Liberty Park was quieter this time. The snow had melted into thin streams that caught the morning sun, and the mountains in the distance looked impossibly calm, as if nothing bad could happen under skies like that. Paulina parked in the same discreet spot, behind a row of bare trees. You sure about this? No, Amara said. But I'm here. Across the street, the clinic door opened. Jake came out slower than yesterday, his gait uneven. He leaned lightly on the railing before making his way to the sidewalk. The twins flanked him again, each holding one of his hands. Amara watched them, her breath fogging the glass. Something in her wanted to rush out to close the distance and say everything she'd kept locked behind pride and shame. But the words still wouldn't come. When they reached the corner, Jake looked up. His gaze found hers instantly. He didn't look surprised. Maybe he'd expected this. Maybe some part of him knew she wouldn't leave so easily this time. He crossed the street before she had time to decide what to do. Amara stepped out of the car, the cold biting through her gloves. She wanted to speak, but the words tangled somewhere between her throat and her heart. Jake. She started. He stopped a few feet away, his face unreadable. You shouldn't be here. I'm not here to, she faltered, to make a scene. I just wanted to talk. You had 6 years for that. I know. He exhaled, looking past her for a moment, then back. They don't understand who you are. Not really. And I don't know what to tell them. Tell them. She swallowed hard. Tell them I never stopped loving them. Jake's jaw tightened. Love isn't what you say, Amara. It's what you stay for. The silence stretched. Snow began to fall again, soft and steady. I'm sorry, she whispered, for everything. He shook his head slowly. You don't even know what you're sorry for. I do, she said. I'm sorry for leaving you with fear you didn't deserve. I'm sorry for being too sick to explain it. I'm sorry for every morning you had to answer their questions alone. Jake looked down, his breath clouding in the air. For a moment she thought he might turn away again, but instead he said quietly, tomorrow. 10 o'clock. Same cafe. Then he walked off, the twins trailing behind him, their laughter echoing faintly against the still air. The cafe hadn't changed. The bell above the door still chimed slightly off-key. The same oak counter, the same smell of roasted beans and vanilla. Amara walked in the next morning, wearing a simple coat and no makeup the way she used to when she and Jake were newly married and broke, but happy. He was already there, seated by the window. No coat, just a navy sweater she remembered folding years ago. He didn't stand when she approached, didn't reach for her. He just nodded toward the seat across from him. Coffee? He asked. She smiled faintly. Still black. Still black. He didn't ask how she'd been. He didn't need to. It was written in the quiet spaces between them. After a long pause, he slid a napkin across the table. Her name was written at the top. Below it, just one question. Why did you leave? Amara's fingers tightened around the paper. She stared at it for a long moment, her throat thickening. Then she looked up. Because I didn't trust myself to stay. Jake frowned. What does that even mean? She drew a deep breath. It means I was sick, Jake. Really sick. Not the kind of tired everyone talks about. The kind that whispers things that aren't real. The kind that tells you the world would be safer if you weren't in it. His eyes searched hers, confusion, softening into something else. Dread, maybe. I was diagnosed with postpartum psychosis, she said. Not depression, not sadness. It was madness, real terrifying madness. I would look at them, our daughters, and see shadows. My mind would turn on itself. I thought if I stayed, I might hurt them. Or you. Or myself. Jake's hand clenched around his coffee cup. You could have told me. I wanted to, she said, but by the time I could form the words, you hated me. And I hated myself. He looked away, his jaw working. The silence between them was heavy but alive, like something shifting in the dark. Finally he spoke. You weren't the only one who broke, you know. They asked for you every night for 2 years. I didn't know what to say. So I told them you were somewhere safe. Her eyes shimmered. Was that true? He met her gaze. I hoped it was. For a long moment, they just sat there, 2 people staring across a table surrounded by the smell of coffee and memories that hadn't finished aging. Then Jake reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I kept this, he said. It's the last song I wrote before you left. Amara unfolded it carefully, sheet music unfinished, notes trailing off mid-measure, like someone had run out of courage. I tried to finish it, he said, but it never sounded right. Not without you. Amara traced the faint pencil lines with her fingertip. Do you still play? Sometimes, he said, when they ask. She looked up. You're a good father, Jake. He smiled, weary, but proud. I had to be. You taught me how to survive alone. She swallowed. I don't want to just survive anymore. I want to live again. I want to know them. I want to make it right, even if it takes the rest of my life. Jake studied her face as though trying to decide whether he could believe the woman sitting in front of him was the same one who'd vanished 6 years ago. If you're serious, he said finally, come to the rink tomorrow morning. The girls go there every Thursday. She nodded, tears threatening, but held back. I'll be there. He stood, sliding the chair under the table. Don't make promises you can't keep, Amara. They've had enough of those. I won't. Jake walked to the door, pausing only once before stepping outside into the snow. He didn't look back. Amara stayed long after he was gone. The coffee had gone cold, her hands still resting on the table beside the folded sheet of music. Outside, children's laughter drifted in from the street, the same sound she'd heard through glass just days ago. For the first time, it didn't feel like punishment. It felt like the beginning of something brave. Thursday morning arrived, wrapped in a soft gray light. Denver's sky looked half asleep, the kind of morning that smelled faintly of snow and cinnamon. Amara woke before sunrise. She hadn't slept much. She'd spent most of the night sitting by the hotel window, turning Jake's sheet music over and over in her hands. Those unfinished notes felt like a mirror, a life paused in mid-measure, waiting for courage to begin again. She dressed simply, no designer coat, no statement heels, just jeans, a wool sweater, and the old scarf she'd found buried at the back of her closet years ago, still faintly scented with lavender. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Not the CEO, not the headline, just Amara. Just human. The drive to the ice rink was short. Children spilled in from minivans and SUVs, their laughter filling the air like music she hadn't heard in years. Inside the rink smelled of metal popcorn and childhood. Jake was already there. He stood by the railing, steadying himself, with one hand, his posture slightly off balance, but proud. His daughters were on the ice, Lily gliding confidently, June giggling as she tried to catch up. They looked radiant, alive. When he saw her, Jake nodded once. No smile, no welcome, but no anger either. Just acknowledgement. It was enough. Amara stood near the bleachers, clutching the rental skates the attendant had handed her, and watched the girls. The twins didn't look her way. She didn't expect them to. Still, she tied her laces. Her fingers shook. The first few steps on the ice were disaster. She wobbled, clung to the rail, tried to remember what balance felt like. The ice hissed under her skates, a sound both alien and intimate. Around her, children darted past in bursts of laughter. At one point, a teenage boy carrying nachos nearly collided with her. She stumbled, windmilled her arms, and caught herself just in time. The boy laughed good-naturedly, and even she couldn't help but smile. From across the rink, June giggled. Lily, pretending not to notice, skated harder. Amara took another step, then another. Each one a small rebellion against the fear that had kept her away for so long. 10 minutes later, she fell. Hard. The sound echoed across the ice. She sat there breathless, a mix of shock and embarrassment warming her face. June stopped mid-glide, covering her mouth in a gasp. Lily slowed too, eyes darting between her mother and her father. Amara laughed softly, self-consciously, and pushed herself up. Her knees ached, but she didn't stop. She wobbled forward again, slower this time, determined. Jake watched from the railing, his hands tight around the bar. There was something unreadable in his expression. Not pity, not pride, just quiet observation. After a while, June skated closer. She circled once, testing her distance, then spoke. "You're not very good at this." Amara smiled. "Not yet." June grinned, that fearless open grin children have when they don't know they're healing someone. "Don't give up," she said. The words hit like sunlight through frost. Lily skated past, pretending not to listen, but her eyes lingered for a beat longer than before. Later in the bench area, Amara sat beside June, who was tugging off one skate and rubbing her ankle. "Does it hurt?" Amara asked gently. "A little. May I help?" June hesitated, then shrugged. "Okay." Amara knelt beside her, gathering the child's thick brown hair to keep it from falling forward. It was tangled, knotted near the back, a chaos only a mother's hand would think to fix. "Your hair?" Amara murmured, reaching instinctively to braid it. Her fingers fumbled, clumsy from years of disuse. Left over right, right over left, she couldn't remember. She tried anyway. The braid came out uneven, messy. June winced as Amara pulled too tight. "Sorry," Amara said quickly. "It's been a long time since I've done this." Lily approached, silently kneeling beside them. She pulled a purple hair tie from her wrist and handed it to Amara without meeting her eyes. "Use this," Lily said quietly. "It holds better." Amara took it slowly. "Thank you. It's for the braid," Lily replied. "Not you." The words weren't cruel. They were honest. Honest in the way only a child could be. Amara nodded humbly. "Still, thank you." Lily stood looking down at the finished braid. "It's crooked," she said. June turned toward the mirror of her phone and tilted her head. "It's okay," she said. "It's her first try." Amara's breath caught. That was what Jake had said to her once years ago, the night she'd burned dinner and cried over the smell of smoke. "It's okay. It's your first try." Across the rink, Jake watched the three of them. His face softened, his hands still gripping the rail, but his posture less guarded now. When they left the rink, the air outside was colder sharp with the scent of melting ice. The girls ran ahead toward the car, their laughter trailing behind. Amara lingered a few steps behind with Jake. "She looks happy," she said, nodding toward June. "They both do," Jake replied. Then after a pause, "They used to ask about you." Amara swallowed. "Used to," they stopped when it hurt too much. She looked down. "I deserve that." Jake's voice softened. "You don't deserve to keep paying for it forever." He started toward the car, but his steps faltered halfway. Amara reached out instinctively, her hand brushing his arm. "Jake." He didn't answer right away. His jaw tightened. "Just tired." He walked on slower this time, his breath shallow. That night, the world changed again. Amara was in the kitchen rinsing mugs when she heard a thud from the hallway, heavy and wrong. Then came Lily's scream. She ran. Her heart pounding, she turned the corner to see Jake collapsed near the bathroom door, one hand curled near his chest, his body trembling. His face was ashen sweat gathering at his temple. "Jake," she shouted, dropping to her knees beside him. "Stay with me, please." Lily was already dialing 911, her fingers trembling. June sobbed quietly, clutching her sister's arm. Amara's training buried deep under years of panic surfaced. She checked his pulse, steady but faint. She brushed the damp hair from his forehead and whispered his name over and over. "Stay with me, Jake. Just stay." The ambulance lights washed the walls in red and blue. In the chaos of the ER amid monitors and hurried footsteps, Amara found herself alone in a chair, her hands shaking in her lap. The twins were asleep beside her, their heads resting on each other's shoulders. When the nurse finally came out, her voice was kind. "He's stable. It was a minor arrhythmia, stress and fatigue. He'll need to stay overnight." Amara nodded, relief flooding through her. "Would you like to see him?" the nurse asked. She looked at the girls sleeping so deeply, it hurt to wake them. "Yes," she whispered. "I'll bring them." Inside the dim hospital room, Jake looked small in the bed, smaller than she'd ever seen him. Machines blinked softly beside him, a low hum of rhythm and mercy. He opened his eyes when she stepped closer. "You're still here," he murmured. "I didn't leave this time." He managed a faint smile. "Progress." Amara sat beside him, her voice trembling. "You scared me. Guess I'm good at that. Don't joke." He reached for her hand, his grip weaker, but still warm. "Then don't disappear again." "I won't." "Promise." She nodded. "I'm done running." Jake exhaled slowly, his fingers still tangled with hers. "Good," he whispered, "because they've just started to notice your shadow. Don't make them lose it again." Amara bowed her head, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. She didn't answer. She just held his hand steady, the way he once held hers, until dawn crept through the blinds and turned the room pale gold. The hospital room was quiet, except for the soft rhythm of Jake's breathing and the distant hum of machines. Morning light filtered through the blinds, turning everything gold and fragile. Amara sat in the chair beside his bed, her hand still wrapped around his. The twins were curled up on the small couch, one head resting against the other, their shoes kicked off their hair, tangled from sleep. It had been a long night, the kind that changes something in you. Jake stirred first, his eyelids fluttering open. His voice was low, rough with fatigue. "Are they still asleep?" Amara nodded. They didn't want to leave. He smiled faintly. "They're stubborn like their mother." She almost laughed, then stopped herself. "Don't make me cry again. I've reached my quota." Jake turned his head toward her. "You've been here all night. I didn't want to be anywhere else." There was no need for more words. The silence between them was different now, not heavy, not painful. It was the kind of silence that had room to breathe again. By noon, the doctor came in cheerful and brisk, explaining Jake's condition in the calm tone of someone who's seen every shade of human fragility. "He needs rest, balanced meals and patience," she said. "He's been pushing himself too hard." Amara nodded. "We'll take care of that." Jake looked at her, eyebrow raised. She met his gaze steadily. "Yes, we." When he was discharged 2 days later, the twins insisted on decorating the house. Streamers hung crookedly across the living room. "A welcome home." Dad sign leaned against the window, half of it written in glitter pen. Jake pretended not to notice the uneven letters. "Looks professional," he said, smiling. "It's homemade." June corrected him proudly. "Mom helped with the glue." Amara blinked, startled. "You called me?" June shrugged. "You helped?" Lily rolled her eyes, but there was no sharpness in it. "She did okay." Jake laughed softly. High praise from Lily Miller. The girls ran off to the kitchen, arguing about cake frosting. For a while, the house filled with the kind of noise Amara had only ever dreamed about, the sound of life being lived. Jake lowered himself onto the couch. He looked tired but peaceful. "You don't have to stay," he said quietly. "You've done enough." Amara shook her head. "I've done nothing. Let me try Jake, not out of guilt, out of love." He studied her for a moment. "You always did love hard. You just didn't know how to stay when it got messy." "I do now." He didn't argue. He just closed his eyes and leaned back, his hand resting loosely on the couch cushion between them. After a moment's hesitation, she placed her hand on top of his. He didn't move it away. The next few weeks settled into a rhythm both strange and familiar. Amara learned the quiet language of ordinary things: warming soup, folding towels, sitting on the porch in the cold twilight, while Jake rested inside. The twins began to let her in by degrees. June would chatter about school projects, asking questions about airplanes and the places Amara had seen. Lily was slower, more careful with her words. But sometimes Amara would catch her watching, curious, measuring, wondering if this woman might truly stay. One evening, while Jake dozed in the armchair, Amara found Lily at the kitchen table, coloring. "Can I sit?" she asked. Lily shrugged. "You can do what you want." Amara smiled gently. "What are you drawing?" Lily held up the paper. 2 stick figures holding hands beneath a tree. Between them, a smaller one with pigtails. "It's supposed to be our family," she said. "But I didn't finish it." "Why not?" Lily hesitated. "Because I didn't know what you look like when you smile." The words pierced deep, but Amara didn't flinch. She picked up a crayon, chose a soft pink, and added a curve to the stick figure's face, small but certain. "There," she said quietly. "That's what it looks like." Lily studied it for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Okay." Days blurred into weeks. Jake grew stronger, though his hands sometimes trembled when he tried to play the piano. One evening, Amara found him sitting before the keys, his shoulders slumped. "It's like my fingers forgot who they used to be," he said. Amara stepped behind him, resting her hands lightly on his shoulders. "Maybe they just need to remember." He looked up at her, half smiling. "You think so? I do." She sat beside him, pressing a hesitant chord. C major, the simplest truth. The sound filled the small room, unpolished, but whole. Jake followed with another note, then another. It was the first time they'd played together in nearly a decade. The melody came out uneven, but there was warmth in it, like two voices finding harmony again after too many years apart. The twins watched from the doorway, whispering to each other, unsure whether to join or to listen. When the last note faded, June clapped. "Play it again?" Jake laughed softly. "Maybe tomorrow." Amara looked at him, her eyes glistening. "Tomorrow sounds good." That night when the girls were asleep, Jake and Amara sat on the porch wrapped in blankets. The air was crisp, the stars scattered like dust across the sky. "You know," he said, "I used to think forgiveness was a one-time thing, like a verdict." And now she asked. He took a slow breath. "Now I think it's a practice, something you have to choose again and again." She nodded. "I'm choosing too. Every day." He turned to her, his eyes soft. "Then we're both learning." They sat in silence, watching their breath disappear into the cold. The porch light flickered once, then steadied, a small, quiet miracle. Inside, the faintest sound drifted from the piano, the melody they'd begun, still echoing. Jake reached over and took her hand. For the first time, she didn't pull away. Spring came slowly that year. In the Miller household, it arrived not with grand gestures, but in the small, unspoken changes: a window left open, the sound of laughter at breakfast, the faint scent of lilacs drifting through the kitchen curtains. Amara had been staying for 3 months now. What began as a visit had quietly become a homecoming. The corners of the house, once foreign and cold, now carried pieces of her mug on the counter, her scarf over a chair, her handwriting on a note taped to the fridge. The girls had stopped calling her Miss Amara. It wasn't Mom yet, not always, but sometimes. And those rare quiet times felt like prayers, answered too late, but still answered. Jake had grown stronger. He still tired easily, still needed to rest, but there was a calm to him now. The panic that once lurked behind his eyes had softened into something like peace. Most mornings, Amara would find him at the piano playing slow, unfinished melodies while the coffee brewed. The music had changed, simpler but truer. Every note carried a kind of humility that made her chest ache. One morning, she brought him a cup of coffee and stood behind him, watching his hands move. "That's new," she said softly. "It came to me last night," Jake replied. "Something about second chances." Amara smiled. "I like it already." He stopped playing and turned to her. "You look different lately." "Older," he chuckled. "No, softer." She looked away. "I'm trying." Jake leaned back on the bench, his eyes searching her face. "You know, the girls told me about that talk you gave at their school?" Her cheeks colored. "The Fox story." He nodded. "They said half the class cried, including the teacher." Amara laughed quietly. It wasn't a sad story. Jake tilted his head. "Wasn't it?" She hesitated, then said, "It was about a mother who disappeared into the forest because she thought she was broken, and how she found her way back when she realized her cubs never stopped leaving the trail open." Jake's eyes softened. "You were always a storyteller." "I was always afraid of the ending," she admitted. That afternoon after school, the twins came home carrying paint-splattered posters and a flyer for Family Day. June waved it dramatically. "They want volunteers again." "For what?" Jake asked. "Games, food tables, storytelling." June looked directly at Amara. "They said parents can sign up." Amara froze, her hand hovering mid-air over a dish towel. "Parents." June nodded. "You could read another story." Lily looked up from her homework. "Only if you want to." It was such a small sentence, "only if you want to," but in it was permission, trust, and a kind of fragile hope that made Amara's throat tighten. She smiled. I'd love to. The day of the event came warm and bright. The school lawn was filled with laughter lemonade stands and the squeak of sneakers on asphalt. Amara stood by the story tent, a children's book in her hand. But it wasn't the story she'd planned to read. Instead, she'd written a new one, the night before, short, simple, but hers. When the children gathered on the carpet squares, she began. It's about a bird, she said. A bird who used to fly high, but one day she forgot how. Her wings were still there, but they were tired heavy. So she sat in her nest for a very long time, watching the sky, waiting for courage. And one spring morning, she saw two smaller birds learning to fly, and something inside her remembered what the wind once felt like. The children listened, eyes wide. She didn't soar right away, Amara continued. She stumbled, fell, got caught in a branch or two. But every time she rose again, the sky made a little more room for her. Until finally she realized, she paused, her voice softening, that she'd never lost her wings at all. She'd just forgotten she was worthy of the sky. The children clapped. Some of the parents did too. But Amara wasn't looking at them. She was looking at the back of the tent where Jake stood, hands in his pockets, and the twins beside him smiling. That evening the kitchen was alive with noise. Lily set the table. June hummed while stirring something sweet on the stove. Jake was opening a bottle of wine, the sound of the cork soft and satisfying. Your story was a hit, he said. Only because you three showed up, Amara replied. June laughed. Dad almost forgot his wallet again. Jake looked mock offended. I was distracted. Lily rolled her eyes. By her. The room fell quiet for a second. Amara met Jake's gaze. There was warmth there, unspoken but real. A recognition of everything they'd lost, and somehow found again. After dinner, the twins disappeared upstairs, leaving Jake and Amara alone in the quiet hum of dishes and the ticking kitchen clock. He stood by the window, watching the twilight settle over the neighborhood. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't left? Amara dried her hands slowly. Every day. And she took a breath. We would have broken anyway, just differently. Maybe we wouldn't have learned what love really costs. Jake turned to her. And now, she said softly, I know what it's worth. He studied her, the corners of his mouth curving just slightly. And what's that? Everything, she whispered. Later that night, after the girls were asleep, Amara found herself unable to rest. She sat at the kitchen table, a pen in her hand, staring at a blank sheet of music. Slowly she began to write. Not notes this time, but words. The lullaby Jake had started years ago. The one that had ended in silence, now had its missing verse. She wrote, You waited in the dark while I built walls from fear. You lit the windows I pretended weren't there. Now the house is open. The night is kind. And I am home, not because I found you, but because I finally stayed. She left the paper on the piano. When Jake found it the next morning, he didn't say a word. He just sat down and began to play. The melody was still hesitant, still uneven, but it carried something new, forgiveness, belonging, and the faint echo of two hearts, finally learning the same rhythm. Amara stood behind him, hands folded, eyes closed, listening. And as the music filled the house, she realized this was what healing sounded like. Not perfection, not a grand finale, but the quiet promise of people choosing to stay one day at a time. Autumn came early that year. The trees in Austin turned amber and gold, weeks before they were supposed to, as if the earth itself was eager to move forward, to shed, to begin again. It had been almost a year since the day Amara saw Jake and the twins at the airport. A year of quiet mornings and long evenings. A year of learning how to stay, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she finally understood what it meant to belong. The house was full now, not of noise, but of life. Lily practiced violin in the living room, every note trembling with teenage grace. June baked muffins that never rose quite evenly, but filled the air with warmth. And Jake. Jake had returned to teaching part-time, his health steady, his humor sharper than ever. Amara's company ran without her most days. She still oversaw things from afar, but she no longer measured her worth by the number of planes that carried her name. Instead, she measured it in dinners that ended with laughter in hands she held through quiet evenings, in the simple rhythm of life at home. One crisp afternoon, she sat on the porch wrapped in an old quilt. Jake joined her with 2 mugs of tea, steam rising between them, like memory made visible. "You're meeting in Zurich," he said. "You're really not going?" She shook her head. "No. The world can spin without me for once." He smiled. "You used to chase the sky. I used to run from the ground," she said softly. "Now I want to stay close to it." He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "You did it, you know." "Did what?" "Came home." Her throat tightened. "It took me long enough." He reached for her hand. "Some roads aren't meant to be straight. What matters is, you found your way back." That evening, the family gathered at Zilker Park for the community concert. It was the same event where months ago, Amara had stood trembling as her daughters played the song that once belonged to their parents, now theirs reimagined complete. This year she was calm, grateful. The twins stood on stage again, bows poised, eyes steady. The first notes floated through the autumn air, soft, sure, full of the ache and beauty of second chances. Jake sat beside Amara, his arm resting along the back of her chair. When the harmony built and the strings began to tremble with emotion, she felt something she hadn't in years. Peace, deep and certain. As the last note lingered, she closed her eyes. The applause washed over her, but she didn't need it. What she needed, what she'd always needed, was already here. The girls ran to them after the performance, faces flushed with pride. June handed her a small program folded in half. On the back, in Lily's tidy handwriting, it said, "For Mom and Dad who taught us that broken things can still sing." Amara felt the tears come freely this time. Jake pulled her close, whispering, "Looks like they found the ending." She smiled through the blur. "No," she said, "they found the beginning." Later that night, when the house was quiet, Amara wandered into the music room. The piano waited in the corner, the faint scent of cedar and old sheet paper lingering around it. She sat down and began to play. The melody was simple, almost hesitant, the same lullaby Jake had started all those years ago. But when she reached the final line, she added one last note, soft and full, a note that belonged to her. Jake appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame, still writing. "Just finishing," she said, smiling up at him. He crossed the room and placed his hand over hers, on the final chord. "Then play it again," he said quietly. "For all the time we thought we'd lost." She did. This time the sound filled every corner of the house, tender and whole, the music of forgiveness made flesh. The next morning, Amara woke before sunrise. The world outside was pale and still, a hint of gold on the horizon. She stepped out onto the porch, barefoot, feeling the chill against her skin. For years, she had feared mornings like this, quiet ones with no meetings, no flights, no noise to outrun her own thoughts. But now she embraced them. They were proof of life, of healing, of the grace that waits for those brave enough to turn back toward love. Behind her, Jake's voice called softly from the doorway. "Coffee's ready." She turned and smiled. I'll be right there." And as she walked inside toward warmth, toward family, toward the ordinary miracle of another day, Amara Langston finally understood. Home wasn't where you came from. It was where you decided to stay. Because sometimes the most beautiful thing a woman can do isn't to rise again. It's to stay, to forgive herself, and to let love meet her where she stands.